Perek Tes Mishnah Vav. The first bit of the Mishnah is actually quite a difficult Mishnah, but we'll try and make it as simple as we can. And we're going to learn this bit of the Mishnah with the parish of the Rash. Hagefes v'hazogin shenasu b'tahara. Gefes and zogin are the remnants of the squashed mass of grapes and olives. Gefes is the olives and zogin is the grapes, which have been pressed to make wine and to make olive oil. Shenasu b'tahara. The first pressing was done b'tahara. The people who were pressed the grapes and the olives were tar. We'll just do the Mishnah and then we'll try and explain it. After that, Tomei people walked over this mass of squashed grapes and olives. And then mashkin came out. Tahirin. These mashkin are tahir. Because originally they were made b'tahara. Right, first of all, the first thing to know is that the word achakach in the Mishnah, the Mefarshim say, is slightly misleading. The achakach actually is better if it's put before the word v'holchu. What's happened here is, you have gefes and zogin, and they're pressed once. They're pressed once with the intention to make wine and to make olive oil. So the first pressing was the normal pressing of grapes and olives, l'rotzain, to produce wine and olive oil. And then what happens is, when the pressing is finished, some of that wine and olive oil seeps back into the gefes and the zogin. Gets reabsorbed in the gefes and the zogin. And then, the next stage of the story is, then Tomei people walked on these gefes and the zogin without any intention at all. Inadvertently, they walked. For whole chualein means they just happened to have walked on the gefes and the zogin with no intention to squeeze them again. And the yotzu mehen mashkin, and the mashkin comes out again when they walked, when the Tameib walked on it. In such a case, those mashkin are tahir. Because they originally were made b'tahara. You may have come across a machlokas about something called mashkin or mifkid pekida or mivle beliyah. The good news is it has nothing to do with this Mishnah, because that machlokas about mashkin, whether they're called mifkid, pocket, mivle bli, are actually only relevant to mashkin which have never come out. They're still in there. They've never been squeezed out. We're talking about mashkin which did come out. They were squeezed originally with intention to turn to make wine and olive oil. Let's stop at this stage. If the original dericha, the original pressing, was done by people who were tomei, then the mashkin which comes out of the gefes and the zogin, of course, are mashkin tmeim. When they get reabsorbed as mashkin tmeim. True, while they are reabsorbed, they're not metame because under the rules of belua. However, they still retain their identity as mashkin tmeim. And when they ever, at a later stage, get squashed out and they come out again, even if they come out again shaloi l'rotzain, inadvertently, they still retain the din of mashkin tmeim, and of course there will be tomei. That's if the people who had originally pressed them were tmeim themselves. But we are talking about a case the original people who pressed them were tahirim. So the wine and the olive oil that came out and eventually got reabsorbed were always mashkin tahirin. Then they come out again. And when they come out again, people who are tomei touch them. So you might have thought that when the tomei people touch the mashke which has come out again, of course they should become tomei. No. Because mashkin only become tomei l'rotzain. This Tana holds, it's actually machlokas in the Tosefta, machlokas between the Tana Kama and Rabbi Shimon. This Mishnah goes to the shit of Rabbi Shimon, that when the mashkin gets reabsorbed, although they were originally mashkin l'rotzain, but when they get reabsorbed, they lose their name of being mashkin l'rotzain. And when they come out again, they're called mashkin shaloi l'rotzain, because they walked on these inadvertently. And because they're mashkin shaloi l'rotzain, the tameim are not able to be metame them. If the mashkin were originally tomei because tomei people pressed them and then they get reabsorbed. Everyone's minded that the name of Mashkin Tmeim never becomes bottled, and they retain that name of Mashkin Tmeim forever. However, we are dealing with a case that they were originally Mashkim Tahirim, just they were Mashkim L'Rotzain. That name of Mashkin L'Rotzain, says Rabbi Shimon, does get lost. When they get reabsorbed, they lose their L'Rotzain label, and they come out as Mashkin Shaloi L'Rotzain, and therefore when the Tmeim walk over them, they are not able to be Makabel Tumah because they're Mashkin Shaloi L'Rotzain. Right, the Mishnah carries on. Kush Shabola Satzinoira Malmad Shabola Esadarvon Levena Shabola Esatabas. Let's first translate. A kush is a wooden spindle. It's not Makabel Tumah because it's called a Pshutik Leit. Remember, Kelim of 8 have to have a base kibble, and this hasn't got. It's just a wooden pole, a wooden spindle. Top of the wooden spindle, there's a tzinoira, a little metal fork. That metal fork, being a kli matches, is Makabel Tumah, whatever happens, because matches doesn't have to have a kibble. What happens is the little metal fork at the top, the little metal hook, gets squashed and sinks into the wooden base, into the wooden staff underneath it. Slomani, a malmad shabola sadav. Malvad is again a wooden pole used for driving cattle. At the end of this wooden pole is a darvon, is a metal hook used to prod the animal. The malmad, being a pshutik leit, is not makabel tumah. The darvon, being klimatches, is makabel tumah. Or you've got a levena, a brick, shabola sadabas, in which a ring has become embedded. It's been squashed into the brick. Vehein tahirim. And these objects, the tzenoira, the darva, the tabas, all tahir, nichnesul oilameis, if now the brick, for instance, with the tabas inside it, goes into an oilameis, nitmu'u. Those metal kelim, which are now embedded in the kush, in the malmad, or in the levena, become tameh in the oilameis, because the only way that kelim inside an oila mace can be protected from tumah, there are only 3 ways that a kli inside an oila mace can actually remain torah. A, if it's in its own oihel inside the oila mace. 2, if it's balua in a baal chai, as we learned in the Mishnah in Perik Ches, Mishnah Hey, about the chicken. When something's balua in a baal chai, it's tumah proof. 3, if the kli finds itself in a kli cheres or in another kli torah which is tzomid posil, and even then that's only matzal medaraisa, because we learned in Mishnah Beis it's not matzal medrabanon. But here we don't have a bulur balchai, we don't have an oila meis, we don't have a tzomid posil. It's just embedded in mud. That's not enough to protect the keli, and the kli becomes tomei, being an oila meis. Similarly, says the Mishnah, siton hazov nitmu. Another way they can become tomei, a zov, is one of those strict categories of avatumah that we learned at the beginning in Perik Aleph. A zov is able to be metamei also beheset. Not only if the zov touches the kli, is he metamei the kli. If he moves the kli without touching it, gives it a push with his elbow, or kicks it with his foot, that's called heset hazov, then the kli becomes tomei. So here, if the zov pushes the kush, pushes the brick, although he hasn't touched the tabas inside the brick, he has caused the tabas to move. It's called heset, and therefore the heset works despite the fact that the tabas is embedded in the brick. Similarly, the brick now noflu la'avir hatanur tar. The brick with the tabas inside, and this tabas has already become tomei from the previous case. Then the whole thing falls into a klicheres, into a tanur. Tim uhu, it is able to be metame the klicheres. This we've had before as well. This case is only going in the case of when the tabas became tomei through an oila mace. So if the tabas became tomei through an oila mace, the tabas becomes an avatuma, or maybe even a halal cherev aviyavois. It's an avatuma at least. And an avatuma, when it now enters the toich of the tanur, the surrounding levena isn't able to be matzil, and the tabas, finding itself in the avir of a tanur, is metameid. noga bohen kikoshel truma tahor. But if we're dealing with straightforward negia, for instance, this brick with a tabas inside, this tabas may even be navia voice hatuma, halal cherev. The brick now touches truma, which of course is very able, very sensitive to be makabel tuma. Nevertheless, although they're so close, and the only thing dividing them is a little bit of a few centimeters of brick, the truma remains tahor, because we only use the numbering system of avatuma, rishon, sheni, shlishi, when all those stages in between are kelim themselves, or oichel and mashkin, things which are able to be makabel tuma. But this brick remains something which is always tahor, and therefore, at the end of the day, the tabas is not touching the truma, and the truma is safe. And that's Mishnah Tes. Sorry, that's Mishnah Vav.